Years ago, I took a look at the original Lords of the Fallen. The original came out in 2014 and was seen as the original Souls clone. While it tried to do its own thing at certain points, it ultimately received mixed reviews. For me, it's a tough game to recommend due to the lack of polish and painfully slow combat. Fast forward to 2023 and a new Lords of the Fallen is released. Surprisingly, the original developers in Deck 13 did not return for this title, as Hexworks was assigned to the project. It's been a while since we've looked at a Souls-like on this channel, so is this a worthy second attempt, or was this series best left forgotten? You start the game and are given a cutscene that seriously would not be out of place in any Dark Souls or Elden Ring title. While the first game is called the original Dark Souls clone, Lords of the Fallen is more suited to that clone moniker. This is especially seen once you have the ability to create your character. In the original, you played as Harkin and had a choice of 3 classes and 3 magic types. Here, you are a nameless character that you can customize to your liking. You can choose one of several classes, which are a direct homage to the classes found in Dark Souls. Heck, there's even a deprived-like class called Condemned that we will end up choosing. Instead of a wooden club as a starting weapon, we will use a wooden bucket. After creating your character, we are given another cutscene and eventually are woken up by a Dark Crusader. We have a lamp of some significant power that brings us back to life. Having this is seen as both a blessing and a curse, as well as explaining how we can be reborn over and over again. There's a ton more to the story as expected, but I won't dive too deep in this review as most of it will be seen as spoilers. Just know that this falls into the typical Dark Souls role of having to cleanse the world of a certain evil. I will say though that I'm surprised on the lack of callbacks or similarities to the 2014 title. To be fair, there are references to the original game, but you will really have to pay attention to spot them. The only overt similarity between these two are the presence of Rogar in both. There's also another connection to the original which seems to make this more of a sequel, but that isn't until the latter half of the game. Honestly though, you really do not need the knowledge of the original game to enjoy this one. If you've played any Souls title, specifically Dark Souls or Elden Ring, you'll feel right at home with the control scheme. You'll have a button for weak attacks and another for strong attacks. You even have the ability to use 2 hands for your weapons, or even dual wield depending on the weapon type. Overall, there's quite a bit of variety to find here. I eventually stuck with polearms, as nothing beats having a nice long stick. With the combat itself, it's pretty good, but I do have some caveats. Thankfully, the combat is much faster than the original and doesn't feel like molasses. There's quite a bit more fluidity in the attacks, especially when discovering various combos. You even have the ability to either quick step or roll, giving more strategy and control on how to avoid attacks. My real main issue, however, is something that plagued the original and many Souls-like titles. Many of these enemies have a bad habit of warping with each swing. Basically, the enemy will somehow move extremely close to you with each swing, regardless of how far you are from them. It isn't as egregious as in the previous title, but it can get frustrating, especially for boss battles. And speaking of boss battles, many of them are quite okay. You have some fun boss battles along with some mediocre ones. I will give credit to the developers for the presentation aspect. Many of these bosses get some pretty cool cutscenes to set the scene of whatever you're about to get into. Some bosses even allow you to choose one of many NPC summons to help you out, making the game feel far more replayable than the first. Along with the tracking issue I've mentioned before, the lack of enemy variety hurts this game's long-term enjoyment. The original title had the same issue where the same enemies in the beginning will end up taking far more hits and doing much more damage in the latter stages. A lot of Souls-likes tend to do this, including Nioh 1 and 2. I don't mind reusing some of the basic enemies, but at least mix it up a bit more in the later stages. As expected, you have your bonfire equivalents in this game represented by vestiges. At these areas, you can level up as expected, rest, and warp between the different areas. You even have the ability to plant seedlings to have a temporary rest point. This helps to cut down on the tedium that these games can suffer from in regards to backtracking. The original Lords of the Fallen was very linear in terms of progression. While the game is still fairly linear here, it's more open, reminiscent of Dark Souls 1. You even have that thing of levels looping back to the rest location to help the levels feel more interconnected. Heck, there are even some places that look exactly like they came from Dark Souls 2. Not sure if it was done intentionally or not, but you'll realize it once you see it. While there is quite a bit reminiscent of Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, there are some unique mechanics to play around with. For one, the umbral lamp that you're equipped with is more than just for light. It allows you to see the umbral realm and even to enter the realm itself. This is required to bypass certain areas as well as to discover various secrets. Within this realm, you can interact with certain objects to help you navigate throughout the world. At first, I thought it was just a gimmick, but it actually gets pretty creative and offers a bit of a puzzle element rarely seen in these kinds of games. If there's going to be another Lords of the Fallen, I would love to see them lean into this lamp even more. Compared to other Souls-like titles, I found Lords of the Fallen to be much easier than many other titles of the genre. It's certainly easier than any of the FromSoft titles that I've played. Personally, I don't find this much of a problem, as not every game in the genre needs to be overly punishing. It's more than okay to have a game that appeals more to newcomers of the genre rather than grizzled veterans. That's not to say that the game lacks challenge, as there are certainly moments and bosses that will require your full concentration. Although, if you are finding the game challenging, feel free to call upon some assistance to have another player join you. PvP also exists, although don't expect a huge community of players at any time. Thankfully, there is crossplay to help increase those numbers, but don't expect a ton of players either way. According to howlongtobeat.com, the main story can be completed within 30 hours. There are several side quests and various endings to unlock, so you can easily triple that time if you so desire. While the length of the game is certainly a solid one, it can feel a bit repetitive by the end due to the aforementioned lack of enemy variety and the weapons feeling a bit samey. The last thing I want to comment on are the graphics. The game was released on 2023 and it shows a decent amount of fidelity as expected. I ran this game mainly on ultra settings, which is the second highest, with cinematic being the top option. Overall, the frame rate held up well over 60 FPS with very few hitches. Many good Souls-likes tend to be well optimized, and this one is no exception. Overall, Lords of the Fallen is a very solid Souls-like that far surpasses the 2014 original. This game features solid combat, a decent variety of builds, and even a unique level switching mechanic that is much more than a gimmick. My only real issues stem from the lack of enemy variety in the late game and how there is a lack of any top tier moments. The game is $60 at full price, which isn't unreasonable, but definitely better at a sale price. It can occasionally be found at 50% off, which is a great value at that price. Thank you all for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.